Today is the 5th year anniversary of Michael Brown being shot in his neighborhood in Ferguson, Missouri, where he lay in the street in the suburb of St. Louis for 4 hours before he was taken. And I would watch these videos over and over, trying to understand, because I had a black son, and I wanted to protect him. And after a while, watching those videos took their toll. And I remember going to pick him up at preschool, and I was driving, and I noticed like my face was leaking. I hadn't been thinking consciously about it, but I realized I was grieving. And I pulled up in the parking lot and tried to stop crying because I didn't want to go in there and like scare all the preschoolers. And a friend of mine came in to pick up her kid, and she saw me, asked me what was wrong. She said, "Let's go to the playground, and you can tell me about it. We'll bring the kids. They can play and we can talk." So we went to Adam's playground in Peterborough, and I sat across from her and tried to explain the latest trauma and that she hadn't heard about and hadn't been listening or paying attention. And I wasn't really paying attention to Calvin. And he came over a couple times a little bit irritated, and I said, go play, go play. And then at some point I noticed he was over with 2 boys who were maybe a year older than he was. And one of them was dressed as a police officer. And he had handcuffs and a gun, and his friend was holding this stuffed German Shepherd. And I saw them chase my son across the playground, shooting at him. And I looked at my friend and I said, "Is this real life?" Because I thought I had imagined it. I thought because that was the nightmare that had been going through my head. So she jumped up, and I was frozen. And she said, "We don't shoot people." And the kids like dropped everything, and she knelt down and took out. She said, "No wonder you were upset." So I'm really grateful for that. And that night, I went by myself down to Boston, and I met my sister. And I walked in the streets in protests because I needed to hear Black Lives Matter. I needed to hear my own voice. So being in community was really important at that point. And it made me understand that healing can look a lot of different ways. Some of these ways have been introduced to me by this amazing woman, Adrienne Maree Brown, who's an author and a social activist. She's written a book called Emergent Strategies, which is about social movements and biomimicry, looking to nature to see how we can understand how to move forward together. And she also wrote Pleasure Activism, where she describes something called generative somatics. The word somatics comes from the Greek root soma, which means the living organism in its wholeness. It is the best word we have in English to understand human beings as an integrated mind, body, spirit, and as social relational beings. In somatic speak, we call this embodiment shape and the collective body, or collective psychobiology. Somatics is a path, a methodology, and a change theory by which we can embody transformation, individually and collectively. Embodied transformation is foundational change that shows in our actions, ways of being, relating, and perceiving. It is transformation that sustains over time. And it is still a rare thing for most of us to sit with what we feel, how we feel. The reality that we carry memories and feelings from what our ancestors experienced, and that we carry our current continuous collective trauma together. The pain can open to other feelings, more nuanced and clear. It can begin to make authentic connection and collectivity more possible. I love the quote by Khalil Gibran that says, "Pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses our understanding." So there are other practices that we can employ to help rewrite these stories in our bodies. Some of them show up in our religions. One of my favorites is the Seder, and I was lucky enough to be invited to my friend Adar and Nora's house for their Seder this spring. And the Seder is the retelling of the story in the book of Exodus of the liberation of the Israelites from Egypt. And in it, it holds all of our experience around liberation. There's a point where you take 10 drops of wine and point it out for each of the plagues. And it's sort of a witnessing of the pain and suffering that comes in liberation movements. And I was so grateful for that, because with things happening in our country, it is very hard to know where to put all of them. And, you know, when you feel sad and despair, it's sort of like, okay, this is something I have to move out as fast as possible so I can keep it moving. And here, there was a place for it, where it was held. And I think that we need that. We need to find cycles that we ritualize and embody to hold our despair and our hope. And that is part of the practice. You know, I'm a massage therapist, so the new agey thing is to do it on the new moon. And, you know, you set your intentions on the new moon, and then on the full moon, it's about reflection and completion. Resmaa Menakem wrote a book that has changed my life called My Grandmother's Hands. And it is about racialized trauma, and in it, he has suggestions of practices we can do individually and together. One of them is a led meditation about meeting your ancestors, which is something that many people had to give up as they aligned with these categories. So it's a way to reintroduce, to put us back into history, to place us so that we have a narrative again. So the practice is key, and the process is uncertain. Staying present means being vulnerable, allowing room for things to come up, which can be painful and scary. But I truly believe more freedom and belonging are on the other side. You know, Toni Morrison says, love is or it ain't. Thin love ain't no love at all. And this has come up for me in my practice, this uncertainty for sure. It was last June 2018, the beginning of June, when I first heard about the separation policies at the border. And it gutted me. For 3 nights, I had dreams where I was looking around trying to find the right pair of shoes so that I could walk down to the border and get those children. And that weekend, I went on a trip to the Widow Jane Mine. And it's in upstate New York. It's an abandoned quarry. And the stone from that quarry is used to build some of our national monuments, including the base of the Statue of Liberty. So I went into that weekend thinking about this trauma, these trauma factories that we have, and that these are dark times. And it made me think of a beautiful speech by a woman, Valerie Carr, and in it she said, you know, these are dark times, but maybe it's not the darkness of a tomb, but the darkness of a womb. And that maybe this is a time of uncertainty where we can birth something that we have always wanted to be. So I'm in this like geological womb, and I walk out thinking, okay, Grace, just breathe and push. And I started moving towards this idea of walking. And a couple weeks later, I thought, this is unreasonable. This does not, I'm a reasonable person. Walking to Texas feels really overwhelming. And so I thought, I'm going to do what feels reasonable, which is wait for this idea to go away. And it did not. And I found myself looking up facts about grading, maps that one might take if, routes that one might take if they were to walk. And, continually hearing these stories of children and families that I could not push away. And I found my face leaking again. And I was like, oh, maybe this is just allergies. But it happened mostly when I was around children, and I'm not allergic to children. So eventually I was like, I just have to go. And I had a friend who works with a group of Mexican and indigenous people, and she was going on a trip to Texas. And I was like, can I go? She said, sure. There's a woman who does work with migrants at the border. I was like, I'm just going to show up, see what happens. So a couple of weeks ago, I called a friend, Kit, who's really good at fundraising. And I started to talk to her about this trip and end up talking to her about this walk. And she said, that sounds like a really cool idea. At the recent, Liberty Vigil, where there was protests at the detention centers, there was a map of the detention centers that went down the country. And maybe we can make a route from detention center to detention center. And I was like, yeah, it's like, lighting little fires along the way. She said, yeah, it's like torches, like the Statue of Liberty. And I was like, okay, I'm going to move towards this idea again. And the next morning, I got a text from a friend. She said, hey, Grace, I had a dream about you. You were working with children and starting fires and tending fires. And I was like, that's weird. The next morning, I'm tagged in a Facebook post by a friend in a group. She writes something and she said, by the way, I don't know if this is connected, but Grace, I had a dream about you. You were working with children and decorating shoes. I was like, this is really strange. And strange things continued to happen. I had a friend on Monday. Grace, I had a dream about you. I was like, I don't want to know. So if anybody else has dreams, I get the message. You can dream about George Clooney or whoever you want. I got it. And I had a friend, Denise, who was very encouraging. She's like, I'll come with you. We'll make t-shirts say, Walking with Grace. And I was like, that's cool. And I'm sweating. She said, she runs a mindfulness group in Burlington, Vermont. She said, I'm putting you on the agenda. I said, what? I said, what is the talk? What is your group about? She said, borders and boundaries. I was like, okay. I'm driving home, and in the corner of the field next to my house, there's this big poster. Granny D walked 3,200 miles. You can walk to Peterborough. Touche, Granny D. So, sharing this idea doesn't feel reasonable. But what is more unreasonable is putting children in cages. So that's where I am. And I want to share with you a practice that I have, that I've been doing for myself since, the first week in November 2016. And I lost my voice yesterday, so I don't know what will come out, but it's a practice, not perfect. And it's just a little line of a song. Lord, don't move my mountain, but give me Give me the strength to climb. Don't take away my stumbling block. But lead me all around. So